Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be telling you some of our Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Deep Trouble. This was one I read and remembered not enjoying very much, but upon reread this week, I didn't think it was so bad. It's a mermaid adventure, so if you're going in looking for Jaws, you might be disappointed, which is probably what happened to me as a kid. Oddly enough, it won a Nickelodeon's Kids' Choice Award in 1995, and so did its sequel in 1998. Now, I personally don't find this to be an award-worthy book, and I would love to know why it was chosen over so many better Goosebumps books, but it's worth checking out if you haven't read it before. This is a pretty great cover in my opinion. The hammerhead shark may not be particularly accurate and is looking pretty orca-inspired, but it looks awesome anyways. I definitely remembered going into this book expecting sea monster adventures, so putting a mermaid front and center probably would have spoiled the surprise. Overall, I just think it looks pretty great, and it's fun having an aquatic cover to spice things up. The 2003 slime border version looks nice too, and I like the way the border matches the swimming trunks. You can see that they also updated the tagline on this one saying, "Swimming lessons won't help you now," which isn't nearly as exciting as Jaws references, but maybe they felt the kids wouldn't get it. The 2008 version has a lot going on, but I think it's an improvement on the original. I like the look of the hammerhead, and his teeth are gnarly. I also enjoy the addition of a skull rock, although that kind of makes me think of pirates for some reason and not mermaids. I think it's interesting that both books forgo mermaids on their covers. Maybe they just thought mermaids weren't scary enough. The only notable merchandise I came across this week was a lithograph, so nothing too exciting there. Our front tag says, "Just when you thought it was safe," which is a Jaws 2 reference whose tag was, "Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water." Our back tag says, "Don't go in the water," which is fine, even though I would say 3/4 of this book take place in the water, and our protagonist Billy seems to have zero fear of it, even when he should. Before we get into the summary, let's read the blurb on the back. Billy and his sister Sheena are visiting their uncle Dr. Deep on a tiny Caribbean island. It's the perfect place to go exploring underwater, and Billy's ready for an adventure. There's only one rule to remember: stay away from the coral reefs. Still, the reefs are so beautiful, so peaceful, Billy can't resist. But he's not alone in the water. Something's lurking deep below the surface, something dark and scaly, something that's half human, half fish. Okay, now on to the summary. The book begins with our introduction to Billy, who is mid-fantasy about battling some underwater creatures that include great white sharks, giant octopuses, and electric eels. The current fantasy involves hunting the great white stingray, which seems to be the least exciting given the 3 prior options. Our opening chapter cliffhanger has Billy slipping into blackness due to a lack of oxygen as he battles the stingray, but it's not very effective considering this is very clearly a daydream of some sorts. Monster Blood 2 did the same thing with its book opener, and I hope these don't become a trend because they really kinda suck. We meet our other characters, Sheena, who is Billy's younger sister, and Dr. Deep, Billy's uncle. Dr. Deep goes by Dr. D, even though Dr. Deep is objectively cooler. Billy is living the dream because every summer, he and his sister get to spend their vacation in the Caribbean with Dr. D, who is a marine biologist and not some vague Goosebumps scientist. We spend some time learning what a marine biologist is, and more about the Cassandra, which happens to be the massive boat they are staying on this summer. Eventually, we get some ominous warnings about shark sightings nearby, and Billy is stoked at the idea of being chased by a shark because he is all about adventure. That would not be my response to a shark sighting. Billy and Sheena explore the water for a bit, and it actually sounds really cool with lots of tropical fish to see. Although Billy of course ends up exactly where his uncle told him not to go, and just as he starts to head back to the Cassandra, he is suddenly dragged down to the bottom of the sea. This time, we get a proper sea monster description, or more likely, a giant squid. As I sank underwater, I turned and saw it. It loomed huge and dark, a sea monster. Through the churning waters, it glared at me with one giant brown eye. The terrifying creatures floated underwater like an enormous dark green balloon. Its mouth opened in a silent cry, revealing 2 rows of jagged, sharp teeth. An enormous octopus, but it had at least 12 tentacles. 12 long, slimy tentacles. One wrapped around my ankle, another one slid toward me. No, my arms thrashed in the water. I gulped in mouthfuls of air. I struggled to the surface, but the huge creature dragged me down again. Eventually, Dr. D yanks Billy out of the water and tries to convince him he just got tangled in some seaweed. Billy remains unconvinced and decides he will find the sea monster and prove his sister and uncle that he's not crazy. This seems like a strong contender for the plot of the book. Once he's all calmed down, Sheena challenges him to a race back to the Cassandra. Billy then demonstrates some very poor judgment. Somehow swimming to a nearby coral reef will get him to the boat faster, so Billy swims towards it despite his uncle's protests. Billy decides to rest on the coral reef and learns in a chapter cliffhanger that this is a terrible decision. Billy screams in agony because it turns out he put his foot directly on fire coral, which is covered in mild poison that can cause a burning sensation for several hours. This delights Sheena, and she's even more thrilled when she finds out that if Billy had cut his foot open, he could have paralyzed himself. Dr. D decides this is enough adventure for one morning and has everybody swim back to the boat for lunch. He also reminds Billy to stay away from the lagoon with the coral, but Billy, shockingly, has other plans because he plans to return to look for the mysterious sea monster. As they're swimming back to the boat, something tickles Billy's thigh and he feels like some sort of creature is playing around with him. Once back to the boat, we meet a new character, Dr. D's assistant, Alexander Dubrow. Alexander cooks most of the food, so we spend some pages discussing spicy chicken salad sandwiches and learn that Billy is a very bland eater. Billy and Sheena then explore the boat's lab, which sounds a lot like the Seattle Aquarium that I just happened to go to during Thanksgiving break, oddly enough. We learn that the equipment is starting to break down because they're reaching the bottom of the research funds, and there's a possibility of Dr. D going broke. This leads to an interesting segue where we learn that last Christmas, Dr. D came to visit his family ashore, but was so uncomfortable with being away from the water that he spent his free time in the bathtub playing with toy boats. So it's imperative for Dr. D's mental health that he get to continue his research out on the Cassandra. Billy feeds some of the fish in the lab, and as he's returning to the main deck, he overhears a man from the Marina Zoo shouting at Dr. D about capturing a mermaid. This immediately sends Billy into a full-on daydream about fame and fortune, causing him to want to be the first one to find the mermaid. The other zoo representative, Miss Wickman, is basing this mermaid evidence off a local fisherman claiming to have seen her, because we all know fishermen are not superstitious at all. These zoo people promise to relieve Dr. D of all of his financial woes with a cool $1 million if he can capture the mermaid. When pressed for what this mermaid looks like, she's essentially just this Disney one. Dr. D is a little hesitant about walking away the first mermaid in a zoo if he does capture her, but the money proves to be more enticing and he agrees to hunt for the mermaid. The zoo representatives say they will return in a couple days for the mermaid, which is a tad demanding considering this is a never before seen creature. They also say to keep it top secret, so of course this is when Billy comes crashing into the room. Dr. D assures everyone that Billy is mature for his age and can keep a secret. Even Billy himself knows that's a lie. That night, immediately proving just how mature he is, Billy sneaks off the boat and swims towards the lagoon. Nothing like hopping into the middle of the ocean alone where you just were previously attacked less than 12 hours ago. Once at the lagoon, he's immediately attacked. From deep below me, I heard a low rumble. I listened hard. The sound, faint at first, grew louder. The waves tossed as the sound became a steady roar. It rumbled like an earthquake of the ocean floor. The waves tumbled and tossed. I struggled to stay on top of them. What was happening? Suddenly, from the middle of the lagoon, a huge wave swelled. It rose higher like a gigantic geyser. Higher, over my head, as tall as a building. A tidal wave? No. The wave broke. The dark creature pushed up from underneath it. Water slid off its grotesque body. Its single eye stared out darkly at me. Its tentacles writhed and stretched. I screamed. The monster blinked its muddy brown eye at me. I tried to turn and swim away, but it was too fast. The tentacles whipped out and grabbed me, tightening and tightening around my waist. Then a slimy cold tentacle wrapped around my neck and started to squeeze. This is all just a little too exciting for the middle of the book, so it's only a dream. However, Billy is not one to listen to his dreams, because upon waking, he immediately sneaks off the boat and swims towards the lagoon. This ends in another chapter cliffhanger, as something with claws grabs his ankle. This ends up being Sheena, who snuck off the boat behind him. I feel like ankle grabs are the new shoulder scare in this book. Sheena wants to know why the hell he's swimming where he's not supposed to at 6:30 in the morning, so he just tells her he's crazy. He then proves this by swimming after a mysterious splash, as Sheena screams at him for to stop and to come back. Kinda like how his uncle did earlier when he stepped on the coral. Turns out he should have listened to Sheena, because once he's at the coral, he realizes that the splash was from a hammerhead shark and that the fin is coming right at him. At least the hammerhead makes an appearance, so the cover's not a total lie. The shark ends up circling Billy, which prevents him from getting back to the boat, so he has to settle on swimming towards the fire coral. The shark's circles get smaller and smaller, and it's actually a pretty tense little scene. Billy reaches the coral, and he has to ignore his entire body burning as he attempts to crawl up it to safety. The shark bumps him back into the water and bites his leg. As Billy is sinking and waiting for death, suddenly a mysterious finned creature appears between him and the shark. The mysterious creature, who is clearly a mermaid, smacks the shark with its tail a few times until it's properly scared off. The mermaid then starts singing whale songs and reveals itself to Billy. The mermaid grabs Billy's hand, which has been all scratched up from the fire coral, and immediately the pain is gone. They stare at each other for a bit before the mermaid dives underwater and pinches Billy's toes. He thinks it's the shark's return before realizing it's just his new mermaid friend playing around. This story moves right along though, because suddenly both Billy and the mermaid are captured in a net, which, as you might imagine, is very unpleasant for the helpful mermaid. This is why King Triton was right all along. Don't interact with humans, we suck. The net gets plopped into the boat, and both Billy and the mermaid scream in discomfort. Once he realizes it's just his uncle, he's somewhat relieved, but still thinks they should let the mermaid go. Dr. D is not about this, and instead he and Alexander chuck her into one of the large fish tanks. Once in the fish tank, the mermaid goes limp, and Billy thinks they've killed her, but no, she's just floating there crying. For some reason, Dr. D decides the most important thing to do right now is to buy an assortment of foods for her to try, and races off in a smaller boat to the mainland to hit up the local grocery store. I'm not a marine biologist, but I think it's safe to assume a mermaid would eat whatever shit is in the nearby lagoon where they found her. Sheena decides it's too hot out in the sun and goes below deck. I feel like a 10-year-old would put up with a little heat to see a mermaid. Billy is a brilliant mind and settles on feeding the mermaid cookies, and is shocked when she doesn't want to eat the soggy cookie. Once left alone with the mermaid, he concludes he must free her, but this is quickly thwarted by Alexander. Alexander takes Billy down for lunch, which happens to be marinated squid. Now, Billy doesn't immediately think to feed this to the mermaid, but he gets there eventually, and it's treated as an incredible discovery. The mermaid likes squid. Who would have guessed that'd go down better than a chocolate chip cookie? Dr. D returns, and they learn that the mermaid communicates through sonar, like a whale apparently. This means she's trying to call for help from her fellow mermaids, and it would be great if an army of merpeople attacked the boat at the book climax. We get a weird chapter cliffhanger where Sheena announces to Billy that the mermaid escaped, only for him to race upstairs and learn she was just messing with him. He contemplates releasing the mermaid again, only to get interrupted by Dr. D, who makes them go to bed. As Billy is in bed wrestling with the ethics of a zoo, he notices that there's a boat outside much larger than the Cassandra. He sees two mysterious figures jump aboard and realizes somebody could be messing with the mermaid. Billy and Sheena arrive on the deck to discover 4 men in all black, with masks huddled around the tank. They apparently have knocked Dr. D unconscious, and Alexander is nowhere to be found. Billy decides to save the mermaid and charges at the men. This goes nowhere, and one of the men just picks up Billy and chucks him in the fish tank. The fish tank is so tall that there's no way for Billy to crawl out. That's when Alexander appears, and dun dun dun, asks where his money is and proceeds to leave with the men. The traitor. Alexander reveals the zoo offered $1 million and these guys offered $20 million, so it was just business, no hard feelings. Dr. D wakes up and tries to take down Alexander. This fails, and the masked men end up plopping Dr. D and Sheena into the tank with Billy and clamp it shut. To make matters worse, the masked men then proceed to chuck the tank over the side of the boat and into the ocean. The tank immediately begins to fill with water from the mesh opening above, and they start to sink. This would be an awful way to die. Dr. D suddenly almost MacGyvers his way out with one of Sheena's hairpins by opening one of the latches. This excitement is short-lived though, because there are 2 other latches and they won't budge. Suddenly, they hear lots of sirens noises, and they realize that they're being surrounded by merpeople who are possibly out for revenge. Except these mermaids are much nicer than I would be. They lift the tank up and open the latches so everybody can crawl out, first dragging them to the bottom of the ocean. Once back on the boat, Billy tells the mermaids they need to go to the other boat to save his mermaid friend. The mermaids speak English, and they race towards the kidnapper's boat with Dr. D, Sheena, and Billy in hot pursuit. Once they reach the boat, it looks like everybody's gone to bed, but then they remember they don't really have a plan. But it turns out neither did the kidnappers, because they have the mermaid tied up in ropes behind the boat, because they didn't have a tank to stick her in, I guess. The trio watches as the mermaids try to free their comrade, only for one of the kidnappers to suddenly notice. Instead of a flashlight, the kidnapper has a full-on flaming torch and proceeds to set Dr. D's boat on fire. I think they would have been better off letting the mermaids deal with it on their own at this rate. They proceed to put out the fire while fighting off the kidnappers until it's finally revealed that the mermaid is free. The kidnapper's ship starts to rock violently back and forth as the mermaids attack it. The trio take off on their boat back to the Cassandra. The next morning, the zoo people return and Dr. D lets them know that he searched everywhere but there isn't a mermaid to be found. Good on you, Dr. D. But it wouldn't be Goosebumps without one last twist. So later, Billy decides to sneak off the boat to see the mermaids one last time, only for him to come face to face with the sea monster from the start of the book, with his final thoughts being, would they believe me this time? And that's how it ends. There isn't a direct TV episode based off the book, so I just chose one at random and ended up being Strange Peas, which was like The Omen for babies. Here's a quick description. When Nicholas's parents bring home his new baby sister Grace, he makes an effort to bond with her. However, after a series of bizarre occurrences, he comes to suspect that the baby is not human. It's probably not a good sign when the only free version I can find is pixelated as fuck. Nick's friend is an early contender for Fashionista.
Be afraid, Nick. Be very afraid.
I rewatched this like 5 times, and I don't get what I'm supposed to be seeing based off the music cue. I have definitely felt this kid's pain, having had an obnoxiously loud baby sister myself.
Doesn't she ever sleep?
They wimped out with this clear vomit.
I think sometimes more comes out of you than goes in. Ugh, gross.
Demon Baby can spell, and we get a Goosebumps G cameo.
Oh, me? Grace?
Sing that.
I don't think a giant evil baby will never not be funny. I just locked the evil baby outside.
Give it to me! Give it! Let go!
Your history, big brother.
These talking baby scenes are something else. The glowing eyes are a nice touch though.
Soon I'll be the only one.
Ha!
The baby ate a math book, and I think it's hilarious.
I don't get it. She ate my math book.
Ouch, Charlie.
You're not getting away with this. Ow, my finger!
I love the idea of this baby eating through a gate.
Mom and Dad are gonna think I did this. What the? Grace!
The baby ate a gerbil.
You ate my gerbil. She ate my gerbil.
The baby regurgitated the gerbil. Well, at least Grace got a happy ending.
Look, darling, she's just like so cute.
He has got your eyes.
And Big Brother Nicholas. Let that baby talk and give me some food. None of that mushy junk.
Overall, I thought Deep Trouble was a perfectly adequate book. It didn't really go hard on the scares, and it felt more like an adventure story if anything. Although the shark attack scene was pretty tense, I also enjoyed when the trio was chucked into the ocean in a fish tank, because I thought that'd be a pretty awful demise. Alexander as the surprise villain was a nice twist too, because he really did seem like a nice guy at the start. I guess it was just a solid book overall, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I found it a bit dull at times, in spite of a sea monster attack and mermaid appearances. Maybe water horror just isn't my subgenre. I'm still going to give this one 4 out of 5 fish tanks, because Stein really did cram a lot into this book without it feeling random. Okay, on to our totals. Deep Trouble lacked shoulder scares, vomit, and asshole victims, but it did have some It's a Prank Bros. In Deep Trouble, we had 2 It's a Prank Bros. These weren't particularly strong ones, but they still count. The first was when Billy pretended to drown at the start of the book to scare his sister, and the second was when Sheena declared the mermaid had escaped out of nowhere to freak Billy out. This brings our series total to 31 It's a Prank Bros. Deep Trouble contained 1 It's Only a Dream Fake Out. This was when he dreamed about sneaking off to the lagoon and being attacked by a sea monster as a result. Although he did proceed to do this later anyways, so maybe it was more of a premonition than a dream. This raises our series total to 8. In Getting Jiggy with the 90s, I counted a grand total of 1 Jiggy 90s moment, and it was a bit of a stretch, with Billy calling Sheena She-Ra. This raises our series total to 79 Jiggy 90s moments. Deep Trouble had a total of 12 chapter cliffhangers, and they were okay overall. Lots of cliffhangers with something touching a body part in the water. This raises our Goosebumps total to 229. The clunky cliffhanger award for this book goes to chapters 1 to 2, where we are launched mid-fantasy and is supposed to think that Billy actually drowned, despite it clearly being a fantasy. Shocker ending. Our big twist to this story was Billy going for one last dip with the mermaids, only to then be attacked by a giant sea monster from earlier in the book, with no resolution. There is a sequel though, so I can assume he lived. This brings our Goosebumps series total to 14. Well, that's it for Deep Trouble. I think this was a decent book, but nothing to write home about. I actually gave it 3 out of 5 at first, but realized it was hard for me to articulate what exactly I didn't like about it, yet I could list quite a few scenes I found enjoyable. Maybe it's just my mood, who knows. Next week is The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, and I'm excited to finally have a book with a direct episode again, because this week's episode was rough, and the last 3 haven't had direct pairings. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Deep Trouble. Did you like the addition of mermaids to the Goosebumps universe? How much money would it take for you to sell a mermaid to a zoo? And what did you think of my water horror clips this week? Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
The pride, the love,